And we are back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching. Uh, we are going to be talking more discoveries that we are making here with the Quran. And as always, we're here with Kash. Hello, Kash. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, JC. How are you?
I'm really, really good. Looking forward to this one because we are now, after the first 5 sessions, we're already halfway through. So we have already introduced a lot of stuff, and now is when things are going to be getting more and more interesting because we will go through the actual finds in more detail, uh, piggybacking on everything that we have already shown before. So, are you excited with the topic that we're going to be talking about today?
Very excited.
Let's reveal it then, although it was actually on the title. So, Ar-Rahman. So, Ar-Rahman is the topic that we're going to cover today. There is a little problem with this name, or perhaps a massive problem with it. We will see by the end of it. And I think probably the first thing that we need to say is it should be pronounced Ar-Rahman, but throughout the video, we will probably be saying Al-Rahman so that people understand that we're pronouncing the definite article as opposed to just being a little bit weird. It's not the right Arabic pronunciation, but I don't think that we're going to have many Arabic speakers listening to the show, not at this point at least. So let's get started.
So, in the Quran, we see various titles, as we are told these are various names. They are totaling 99 apparently. The main one, everyone will know, is Allah. This is said to basically either be a proper name or a title for the God. It flows back and forth depending on which Muslim you talk to. But for our purposes here, we're going to treat it as a proper identifier for Allah, the God. But it's still a title. But we see Allah primarily, but we also see Lord very often. We also see Creator. We also see something Al Aziz. This one's interesting. We put it in brackets. It's not necessarily used the same way the other ones are, in the sense of being in the middle of a verse as a standalone indicator for God. It usually occurs in these Allahian declarations at the end of verses where we see Al Aziz, Al Hakim, and things like that. We put it here to for note because in the Wettstein manuscript, the 1913 one, I think, yeah, 1913 one, Odon Lafontaine identified that the Uzair in question of the Jews say that Uzair is the son of Allah. They then say Uzair means Ezra, but no one said Ezra was the son of God. It's kind of weird. Well, in the Wettstein, we see that actually that is Al-Aziz, and that was scrubbed from the manuscript tradition. So basically what happened is they have the Z character is the R character with a dot above it. So if you don't have a dot there, it becomes Uzair, but it's actually Al Aziz. So it's worth noting and is important, but not necessarily for the content we're going in today.
Yeah, it's
But
actually maybe not really about Islam, but within the Quran as well. In 4 different places, they call Pharaoh Al Aziz, as saying, they're using one of these grand titles as the Almighty, because the people in Egypt, they would have these huge egos. They thought that they were gods on earth. So it really appears as well in that other context. But normally we see it, and like Kash said, it's all about Allah in this very important manner, but also quite restricted. Hence why it's in brackets.
and you say it's Almighty. That is the standard Islamic understanding today. Worth noting is that Aziza in the Syro Aramaic would mean more so beloved, which is why we see it translated by Murad as dear, rather than it being necessarily almighty or anything of the such. Anyway, this is the another title, which is the main one we're going to be looking at today, is al-Rahman or al-Rahman. We're going to be using al-Rahman for simplicity here and clarity. So that's the title we're looking at today, and how it's used, what context it's used in. We're going to be doing a reasonable exploration of that in this stream.
And perhaps the right place to begin is to say why we're actually looking at this name. It should just be one of the titles of Allah. And like Kash said, there are plenty of them. So why are we looking at this one? And it is because it actually sticks out like a sore thumb. The first thing that we notice is if we look for in the translation from Murad, the super literal translation that he has done, that it appears basically 57 times throughout the verses, ignoring the Bismillah, of course. And then the other ones are just headings. But it appears a lot. The thing is, he doesn't translate Ar-Rahman. And that one is then a point of further study. If he doesn't translate a word, is there is a problem with it. Either it didn't exist exactly, or he couldn't find it in any of the old dictionaries and stuff that he actually checks. But if we have something like the Bismillah and one of the words in there he doesn't translate, we decided to actually look into it. And as we can see on this list that we have on the left hand side, it appears throughout the book a lot. But one of the instances, it actually, the place where it appears the most is in Surah 19, Mary or Miriam. So that is the name of the mother of Jesus. And that's where Ar-Rahman appears a lot. And it doesn't appear just in these final verses where it says, well, Ar-Rahman, and then another word. It appears in a different way, which we're going to see as we go through. So,
And I mean, it's interesting. We're putting this here to show how in Surah Al-Maryam 19, 16 times, which is double the amount in any other surah. And it's like, Mary. What does Mary have to do with Al-Rahman? Interesting.
I wonder if there is a connection. Well, let's find out. So, So it appears in the Bismillah, and something that we have discussed in a previous videos, probably a couple of times already, is that there seems to be a bit of a problem with the positioning of words. The names of Allah, when they appear at the end of something, including in the Bismillah, they will have, in theory, two names, like the one, the prevailing, and we made the case that it was meant to be read the prevailing one. And the reason, probably, why in translations they do it in that manner, and they insist that there are two names and there are two of the titles of Allah, what we are saying is no, the last word would most likely be an adjective to the previous one. So in this example in the Bismillah, there is a huge difference between saying in the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman, the merciful, or saying in the name of Allah, the merciful Rahman. That would be a huge difference. But we have discussed the problems with the definite articles and the positioning in a previous video. So we are not going to delve into detail because we've already done that. However, we're going to show this. So if this formula in the Bismillah, which is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, and we would expect to find these words being used throughout the whole book, throughout the Quran, in a very similar manner, at least to some degree. But that's actually not what happens. So we have Ar-Rahim, which is meant to be a word, a noun. It's always being used in the majority of cases, 32 out of 36 instances, ignoring the Bismillah, I will not say that again, they will appear at the very end of the verse and together with another noun, being the merciful something, being an adjective. Then there are 4 cases where that doesn't happen. 3 of them is nothing to do with God. It's when he's talking about the merciful ones or things like this. It's just a normal adjective. And as you can see, it's actually translated as an adjective, the merciful ones. And in one case, it appears in the penultimate position, like a noun. And then the word that follows would be the adjective to that previous one, but only in one case. So we would expect to find something similar with Ar-Rahman, but we don't. When we look at how Ar-Rahman is being used outside of the Bismillah, it is mostly used as a noun, and it has its own things and lots of things are happening, and Ar-Rahman does this or does that, and that's actually what we're going to look at. And remember, this is one word, one of the very few words that is used in this manner. Ar-Rahim doesn't follow this pattern. You can argue that, well, Allah, Lord, and Creator follow this pattern, and then it's Ar-Rahman, which is very much appearing in Surah 19. So as we go through, we will see why this was always meant to be understood as a different name than what we now think it is.
So we'll look a little bit at some South Arabian inscriptions for a little bit of background knowledge on the zeitgeist and understanding and attestation of this Rahman, or in this case, we're looking at Rahmanan, but you can very easily tell how similar it is. And we're looking here at one of these inscriptions. This one I find of particular interest. We looked at the lines 1 to 4. They're just talking about this and this person, son of this and this person. So they're not relevant theologically. So only line 5 here is relevant, where we see by the merciful, that would be b-rahman, which b is the prefix to say by, like the b-ismillah, right? Bismillah. So by the merciful, and then Rab, HWD, and this means Lord, Rab, of the Jews. And this one particularly stands out to me, just of interest, because it sounds to me like the INRI, although one can argue that, yeah, of course, Yahweh is the Lord of the Jews. So it could be the Father. So let's look at a couple others, just to see the amount of attestation we have for this word. So Rahman, in Yemen, these are South Arabian inscriptions, was well known. And in this one, we have to show it. It says, by the power of the merciful one and his Messiah, suggesting that in this context, the merciful one, Rahmanan, would seemingly be the Father. Let's look at some others here. This one's a little longer. We see the word repeated again and again. So we have the merciful master of heaven, that he grant to him and his spouses and to his children, the merciful, to live a life of justice and to die a death of justice, and that the merciful grant him children who are healthy, who will fight in the name of the merciful.
This one in particular could be almost anything. So we see the different attestations. The first one looks like, well, it could be Jewish, but it could be also the INRI inscription or the another name for Jesus. On the second one is almost like borderline. Is it talking about the Jews and he's saying, well, Yahweh, and actually his Messiah, because his Messiah is powerful, or is it actually talking about the Trinity? This one in here, the third one, is just kind of, could be anything. Could be Zeus. It's just saying by the merciful, but they are not really explaining who that merciful is. Just to show that in the south, they actually had this name appearing quite a bit, and they could mean quite a number of things, which help the confusion that we are discussing today, right?
Okay, I just noticed something, and it can totally be explained away. I just realized it says in line 6 here and 7. So it's we'll go start from 5. The merciful master of heaven grant so that he may grant him to him and his spouses and to his children, al-rahman, or rahmanan, the merciful, to live a life of justice and to die a death of justice. Something about that reminded me of Jesus. But that said, this could be talking about granting him from al-rahmanan or rahmanan a life of justice and death of justice. So I'm not going to focus too much on that right now. Let's have a look at some others. So here we have, may the name of the merciful, Rahmanan, who is heaven, be blessed and praised, and Yisrael, and their God, the Lord of the Jews, who helped his servant Shahum. So we're looking at a lot of these inscriptions. We see that this is a well-known name.
Yeah, this one in particular, I find it interesting because we see something quite kind of unusual. On the very first one that we saw, it said, by the merciful Lord of the Jews. And here he's saying, by the merciful, and then a moment later, and Israel and their God, the Lord of the Jews. So in this one, the Lord of the Jews is not the Rahman, as opposed to what it says on the other inscription. So they have different beliefs. They seem to be quite Abrahamic, and they're using this name a little bit willy-nilly.
Yeah, so point being here is that we looked into even outside of these South Arabian inscriptions, and Rahman is a well-known name among Jewish and Christians alike, depending, of course, on their origins. Of course, Greek-speaking Christians would have not been familiar with it necessarily, as it's a Semitic word coming from Rahm, R-H-M, meaning like love, care, mercy, these kinds of things. But yeah, we're just sort of showing it how it's used, and it can be used for the Father. And this we can seemingly see in some of these inscriptions. We can deduce that. However, it's feasible that it could also be used otherwise. And here we see this one makes it a little bit more clear, at least in this one, they mean it as the Father, right? Because we see in the name of Rahmanan and his son Christ the victorious. So this one is seemingly from a Christian Yemeni inscription where they're identifying Rahman, which may be worth noting how it's Rahman and not Rahmanan. That might be relevant. This needs further analysis because you can very clearly see how in this one we see RHMN, and then the other ones we see two N's. It might be relevant.
And unfortunately, we haven't found these in sources that were not Islamic. So the ones that we have found, and the link is actually there below, is where they're writing these things. So unfortunately, with other things, we're doing a lot more research, like with the Quranic manuscripts and stuff. But this is something new for us. We just found it in Islamic websites, copy paste it. So take it with a pinch of salt. If there's something wrong in there, we're just copy pasting to show that even according to their own translations of these inscriptions, it means like this name was used in all of these different ways, including this very final one. I think, if I remember, that one is fun. Oh yeah, this one is fun.
Oh, wait. Where am I looking? Top left, right? By the power and favor of Rahmanan and his Messiah and the Holy Spirit. So this is a term used by Christians. That's important to note.
Yeah. So we're seeing almost like a progression. In one place, we have the merciful one and his Messiah. In another one, the merciful one. And then, oh, and Israel and their Lord, the Lord of, and their God, the Lord of the Jews, and the merciful, the Rahman, and his son. So it's a little bit all over the place. It looked like a name that they would have used, yes, like Aziz or something of the sort, just a name that they wouldn't translate. We actually do that to this day when we think about, we use the name Christ. Is not the name, it's a title, and it comes from Greek, but we wouldn't translate it. We would just read it Christ. People then know who you are talking about. So it actually looks like they use the name in a very similar manner, and by saying Rahman, people would know exactly what God you're talking about. You're not talking about Zeus or something like that. And and they wouldn't necessarily translate it. It comes from something being merciful, but I don't think that they understood it in the sense that it was an adjective. I think they saw it as a name.
Yeah. Also worth noting the whole Lord of the Jews. Maybe I already said it. I'm repeating myself. It might be an echoing of the INRI, that being the inscription that was made on the cross that Christ was crucified on, which reads Jesus of Nazareth, Lord of the Jews, or King of the Jews more specifically. But Lord King, you can see how that could be intertwined or used one or the other. So this potentially could be a reference to that, but
Yeah.
it's not concrete.
Oh, and oh, this one is also fun. I think this one is for you.
Yes. So here we're getting into some of the verses. So in 1710, we see, say, evoke Allah or evoke al-Rahman. Whatever day ye evoke, so for him are the goodly names. And do not display by thy prayer, nor conceal by it, and seek between that away. One thing very much worth noting here is this equivalency, or one or the other either works. And interesting, we don't see al-Rahim here, to your point about how it's not used the same way, which goes to the point about the definite articles. But here we see, okay, Allah or al-Rahman, either one works, basically. For him are the goodly names. And also, interestingly, we see the second part here at the end, do not display by thy prayer. To me, this echoes very much. Do not pray on the street corners as the hypocrites do, for they, love the attention of others. I'm paraphrasing. But we all know that verse in the New Testament where Christ is denouncing public display of prayer. So that's interesting.
Yes, and then the second bit when it says nor conceal by it and seek between the other way, it looks almost like they knew what Jesus had said, and then they just went a little bit trying to find a middle ground. But the current Islam has gone very, very far at the other end of doing it all in full display, and we see that quite a lot, contrary to what the Quran actually says. But hey ho.
Do not display by thy prayer. Okay, Allah, let me go pray on an airplane.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. All right, so let's see. Oh, we have more verses, and these ones are as well interesting. One where we have Ar-Rahman appearing 3 times. Am I talking about this one, or are you talking about this one? Can't
You
remember.
go ahead and you can take it.
I can take it. Okay. So this one, it's well interesting. 2 verses, Surah 25, verses 59 and 60. So it's talking about the creator. So he who created the skies and the earth, and then and what is between them in 6 days, fine. So that's the creator, certainly. Thereafter, even himself over the trellis. You had done some research on the trellis word, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak too much on it. I already spoke on it in previous live streams. But it's important to note because it's translated often as throne because it avoids some complications, which is that trellis, which is what Murad translates it as, is actually a lattice structure. Like, let's say if you go to a wine garden or like a vineyard, yeah, vineyard more likely, you see these fence like structures where the vines entwine on them, right? They like thread through them, grow on them. And that's the imagery being presented here, actually, not a throne, right? It's that he evened himself over this vineyard style lattice structure fence. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it, but I think you get the gist, right? And this is connected to this idea of Christ being the good vine, right? Where after creation, Christ evened himself, or I'm jumping the gun. Al-Rahman, right? Jumped, evened himself over this trellis. So there's a linkage there with the good vine, but we'll leave it there.
So the imagery is very much Christian, and anything to do with vines or with grapes, it's actually cannot be Islamic in any possible way. They have actually forbidden the consumption of wine, and instead of getting grapes in heaven, they get maidens. So, if you got that reference, well done. So let's actually continue. So this is all about himself, the creator, even himself over trellis, and then it just tells you who that is, and that is Ar-Rahman. So asked by him an experienced one, and when it was said to them, whoever these them people are, so they're saying prostrate to Ar-Rahman, and they said, and what is Ar-Rahman? Are we to prostrate to what thou command us? And it increased them in repulsiveness. Now, the interesting thing is that if these happen to be Allah, for instance, or Yahweh, they would be talking to people who actually understand what is being spoken of. So at no point they could say something like, and what is that? And what is Yahweh? What is Allah? This suggests that they are actually talking to a group of people who are not familiar with the subject, with the creator who created in 6 days. Now, one could argue and say, well, this is actually because it's talking to polytheists and pagans and so on. That's actually not the case. The audience for this book was pretty much to bring everyone, the Jews and the Christians alike, into this very specific heresy that they had created. So they would understand full well what it is. Reading that into this verse, it would be they're approaching the Jews and they would be asked to prostrate to Jesus. That's kind of like the punchline. And they would just refuse that, say why. Basically, they don't acknowledge him. Christians would understand it, everybody else would understand it, but most likely this would be one of these verses saying, we go to the Jews, we say, prostrate to Ar-Rahman, being Jesus, and they say they don't recognize it as something. So at least that's my reading into this.
Right, that's a fair reading. I would push back a little and say that it's totally a feasible argumentation to say that although it may not be pagans necessarily, but the audience could be simply linguistically unfamiliar with this term. It's totally feasible as well. And also, I would suggest, and we'll speak about this in further streams, but Al-Rahman, I don't think is necessarily whatever. We'll move on.
Okay. We have actually Andrew on the chat. He's going to be moderating as well. So trellis is something used in growing grapes. It shows that we guide Allah. Well, guide, copy paste, still, yeah, one of those I think would do. Okay, let me actually go back to the show. All right. So the next one, we have extracted every single appearance of this word, ar-Rahman, within the Quran. And this is where now we're going to show that they actually don't follow the same pattern to any other words apart from Creator, Allah, and um, and Lord. And it is actually used as an actual noun that is actually doing things. So we got all of them out, and there are some words that keep repeating a lot. Some of them, you look at the verses that mention Ar-Rahman, and you cannot actually tell what it's talking about. It's just a very generic verse. But there are some that they just keep appearing again and again. One of them is Lord. As we can see there are a number of verses that will include the word Lord. They are making sure that the audience understand that your Lord is not something new, or rather, uh, God in general terms or something. They're telling the audience clearly that your Lord is Ar-Rahman, our Lord is Ar-Rahman, and so on. They are making it clear that you understand. It is talking specifically about that persona, which other people wouldn't understand who it is. Also, another word that appears a lot is, well, a few times, is covenant. When we think about covenant, at least I think about covenant, and I'm not thinking about Abraham or anything of the sort. I'm thinking Moses, and then I'm thinking Jesus. That's actually where my head actually goes, like first covenant and second covenant, or rather, as I said, that's how I pretty much see it. So when we see the first verse on that second section, Surah 19, verse 78, did he uprise the absence, or did he take for himself a covenant at Al-Rahman? Okay, so this is talking about someone taking a particular covenant. I thought that covenants are supposed to be for like lots of people, but the next one is the one that is very interesting. So Surah 19, verse 87, they do not own the intercession except he who has taken himself a covenant at Al-Rahman. So now we have in the same verse Al-Rahman, covenant, and very importantly, intercession. Mm, Cash, what do you think about that super important and curious word?
Well, I want just as a quick correction. There is no covenant with Moses, right? I know that's where your mind goes, but the covenant is only there's only two covenants, which is why we say Old New Testament. That's not because they're like, oh, this one's old, this one's new. Old Testament simply means covenant. So that's why we split it in. These are the texts for the Old Covenant. This is the New Covenant. The Old Covenant was made with Abraham, between God and Abraham, right? And that was a promise for the land. Anyway, so yeah, you're right that this is a very curious verse where we see that the intercession. So this is on the day of judgment, right? That there is someone interceding on your behalf. So if we go to according to the Islamic traditions, that might be the Quran with googly eyes and a tongue. But we're putting the traditions aside. We're only looking at the Quran, right? So the question of how intercession works, let's look at the verse. They do not own the intercession. There is no intercession for them, except he who has taken himself a covenant at al-Rahman. If there's only two covenants, which covenant is it talking about? Is this talking about the covenant with Abraham? Or is it talking about the covenant made with Jesus in the New Testament? Hmm. And
So in order to get so in order to get intercession, it is linked to having a covenant. And you said that in the traditions it says the Quran appearing on Judgment Day and then giving testimony for you. Also, I think the Black Stone does the same thing, but that is not triggered by any sort of covenant, as far as I know. It just says if you memorize the Quran, it appears and talks and says how well you recite it or something of the sort, right?
right. I don't know exactly, but that's neither here nor there necessarily. I mean, the hadiths are should be thrown out anyway, except as like a guide, a little bit of a clue here or there about how the thing evolved, but the sources are way too late. So what we're dealing with is the Quranic text. And in the Quranic text, the question of intercession here is only for he who has taken himself a covenant at al-Rahman. And there is no covenant, I think you mentioned this, there is no covenant in Islam, as in their standard Islamic narrative. There is no third covenant. There's the covenant with Abraham, the covenant with Jesus, and then they don't emphasize these points, right? But there is no third covenant, right? There is no old covenant, new covenant, and newest covenant. So
Yeah.
the covenant is either that with Abraham or that with Jesus. And if we're talking about intercession, there is only one intercessor. It is he who judges and also he who washes us clean and represents us and intercedes hence for us on the day of judgment, which is Christ Jesus.
Well, in their traditions, they actually still believe that Jesus comes back on the day of judgment and actually imposes Sharia, which we've discussed before what it means. So, according to them, he's actually going to be there on the final day. And of course, the traditions say everything. You can find stories that says one thing and then the opposite thing. So you pick whichever you like. But in their beliefs, they will still say, yeah, Jesus actually comes back. It's almost like they had that belief to begin with when all of this heresy started, and that's not one thing that they could have removed. If I think if they had the opportunity to remove it and say it's Mohammed who comes back and does these things, they would have done it. But I don't think they had that possibility. So the covenant from Jesus seems to then have this lasting impact in their memory, which they cannot really remove. So when we're actually talking covenant, I cannot think how it could be anything other than that one covenant with Jesus, and that's that. There is nothing else. With Islam, then they just get instructions. Well, you go and you just obey because the point of a covenant is a promise that God is going to do something for you, as opposed to the instruction, which is just go rule the world and everybody will pray to Allah. It's like that's not a covenant. That is a command.
Yeah, a covenant is an agreement, a promise between man and God. So if you're faithful, then you get the land of Israel. And if you're, well, I guess it's not really called the land of Israel, it's the land of Canaan, rather, actually, right? The promised land, which is now considered Israel. That's a whole other topic. I wanted to point out also, and then also the next covenant, the next agreement is that which we have our sins paid for by Christ in the fact that we are faithful to him and follow his commandments, or his commands. I wanted to point out before we move on, to the point about how Rahman is treated not as a title, but as a noun, as a proper name. And you can see this, right? Because Lord is not a proper name. Lord is a title. And we see here in 2090, in 2112, and 1930 here. In the second, the two second ones, well, the second and third more clearly, obviously, where we have your Lord, right? The title, Lord, is al-Rahman the subject, the name, the proper name. So al-Rahman is being treated not as a title, right? That would be like saying your Lord is king. It's like that's kind of weird, right? It's like your Lord, it's identifying who your Rab, who your Lord is, which is al-Rahman. And also our Lord and your Lord. So yeah.
Yeah, and also you would expect to find kind of an even distribution to a degree, that you would have your Lord is Ar-Rahim and your Lord is Al-Aziz and these sort of things. And we're going to see more verses with when Ar-Rahman is actually used in the middle of a sentence with Ar-Rahman doing things. But you would expect that to be, well, if they are all titles, then you would see all of these other titles being used a lot instead of just one very specifically, very heavily on Surah 19, Miriam, and with these keywords like Lord, Covenant, and let's see actually what else we have. Oh yeah, you like this one.
Oh yeah, the birth one question. This one's great. So let's just read through a couple of these verses. A lot of them find themselves in Surah Maryam, which is Surah 19. So we will start here at Surah 19, verse 88. And they said, Al-Rahman took himself a birthed one. In 91, we see that they evoked for Al-Rahman a birthed one. 92, and it must not be for Al-Rahman to take himself a birthed one. 21, 26, this is now Surah 21, verse 26. And they said, Al-Rahman took himself the birthed one, and it's rebuked. So what we see here is that there is an insistence. There is no birthed one for Al-Rahman. Al-Rahman did not take himself a birthed one. And so, yeah, we'll read this note here. The Quranic authors were very keen on reassuring their audience that Jesus had not left any descendants. Apart from the verses attached to al-Rahman, Surah 6, 101 describes the creator as not having a birthed one, and that he did not have a companion, and hence couldn't have a birthed one, right? You need a companion for a birthed one, eh? Surah 33:40 states that Muhammad was not the father of any of your men, which is yet another claim about Jesus, referred to as Muhammad, MHMD, as it was originally written, often translated as the praised one. So we see this connection. We have this insistence that, well, also elsewhere we see that, well, okay, I'm not going to make that assumption. I forget exactly if that's right. But so Muhammad, which is Mahmed, which is MHMD, which is a title for Christ, was not a father of any of your men, right? Hence, he did not have any children, right? He did not have a companion, right? And so this thematic of a rejection of X person having a birthed one is shared across al-Rahman, Mahmed, and Isa.
The creator. I can't remember actually if it says about Isa. I think that would have been most certainly removed. But those three appears, and of course Allah, but Allah appears in all sort of different ways. But Ar-Rahman didn't have a birth one. Then the creator didn't have a birth one, and then Muhammad didn't have a birth one. And it's like, okay, so let's think about this statistically. So you have this huge book, and you happen to have the insistence that your God did not have a son. And it's like, okay, fine, they are attacking the Christians. And then you go, oh no, hang on a minute. But also, what a coincidence. You have your prophet who also was not the father of any of your men. Translated is slightly different, but it carries exactly the same meaning. It's like, what a coincidence that they all seem to have the same meaning when talking both about the God and also about the messenger. And as we saw as well in a previous video, there is Surah 47, verse 2, which very clearly is saying that things happened in the past, people believed in the past, and then that thing in the past, which is translated as it normally, but if you read it properly, is this Muhammad person removed people's sins and amended their condition in the past tense. So in the past tense. So you start to see how, okay, so if in that verse he's talking about Muhammad in the past tense and he had this superpower, which is only available to Jesus, and then you get to all of these verses, the creator did not have a companion. Okay, so that's Jesus, past tense. Muhammad was not the father of any of your men. Okay, so that's also Jesus. And then we get Ar-Rahman, and it keeps saying he did not have a birth one, he did not have a birth one. And it is very heavily appearing in Surah 19. Is well, at what point we can stop saying, oh, well, it's just a coincidence? I mean, when is one coincidence too many? I think we have quite a few stuff here pointing at one particular character being Ar-Rahman, and that is not Allah.
Yeah. This is maybe a little too complex and stuff, but I would find it worth noting for people to investigate this topic themselves. But you can see how every dynasty, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and all these henceforth, they legitimized their authority by making lineage claims to MHMD. And then that gets read in the way we see it today as, oh, they're tracking their lineage to Muhammad for authority. I would posit that at this time in question, there was no Momo yet from the Hijaz. So the question of lineage is actually, and this is very highly relevant in terms of the very early church. There was a contention between Jewish Christians who had their tradition such that they affirmed that it was not Peter, but rather James, the Jewish brother of, well, I guess both Peter and James would be Jewish, right? But the idea was that they said that the true authority in the church, based in Jerusalem, was that structure there, their bishop and so forth, and that was through James, the brother. And because now we have a situation where we have brothers, which are half brothers, but nonetheless the family of Jesus, they themselves could technically have children. And we have a source where it was considered so serious to the point where the Byzantine emperor called in two suspected grandchildren of Jude, who was also a brother of Jesus, right? So you have James, Jude, and Simon. And this claim was taken very seriously of the idea of having a family of the Lord, right? Because if God incarnates and becomes flesh, and he has a brother, and his brother has sons, and they have sons or daughters, and so forth, now you have a whole lineage here of the family of God. And this could very well be a major point of contention and question here, which is why then we see in the Shia sources, especially with the whole tradition and idea of having by lineage an imamate, where you have the imams one after another by lineage, from descended from Ali, which is the exalted one. Ali is also Jesus. It's so funny how all these things become Jesus. But it's about making claims to lineage, which is why an insistence in this text here we can see, no, he did not have a birthed one. No, no, no. That's one possible reading and fairly feasible, because this claim was certainly happening. We have sources of the Desposini. It's going to be terrible to transliterate that from me saying it, but just search up Desposini. Probably not perfect, but you'll find it. This was the family of the Lord. So this concept existed, especially in the Gospel of the Hebrew tradition, which is also relevant for the Quran, but that's going to be something for another topic. But this insistence about rejecting a birthed one may well be related to this topic.
And also, you actually just mentioned Shias, and is a topic that we've discussed before, and we have to delve into in a lot of detail. But that what has happened with the Shias actually proves as well that lineage was something that people were claiming, and in the end, you have the Shias who they believe because of Fatima and Ali, and then Hussein, and how I think it's if I remember correctly, sorry, it's been a while, Fatima and Ali being created from the Nur and the Ruh or something like that. So in the end, we are there in the say Arab lands in the 7th century, and this is what it was created. They were pointing at someone and saying, well, that guy is divine, and now we have the authority to rule because we are the descendants of the guy who was divine. And you see how they created the whole thing, because none of that was actually true. But it seems like they were inspired by uh, people saying, oh yeah, we're descendants of Jesus, or from the siblings of Jesus. He didn't have a birth one, but yeah, his siblings did, and therefore, buy my camel. Things would have happened, and we see that both in Sunni and particularly in Shia Islam. So I think it is beyond any doubt that people would use this sort of like claims to give themselves legitimacy. It's possible that even the whole story of Muhammad was created for that reason as well, to give the Umayyads, the descendants of Abdul Malik, actually to give themselves more legitimacy, although not through blood, but through conquest. The Shias go full blood on why they are allowed to rule. So it makes a lot of sense why this book would be so heavy with not having a birth one, not having a birth one, except that when this was written was all about no one being able to claim descendants, being descendants of Jesus.
I will posit that there's also another reading of this, which is about the divine and human nature as being distinct, and that is something again for another video. I will point out again, also before we move on, there is a very interesting Syriac, and also I think it was translated into the Arabic, a source which is contemporary to the time of the Quranic writing, just a little bit before it, right? So this is sort of building up to. And in this source, the author, almost as like a offhand remark, mentions that before the time of Hadrian, which is, I guess, yeah, Hadrian is the one who expelled the Jews from Jerusalem after the Great Revolt, that the author essentially just says, without any further detail, that before the time of Hadrian, the Desposini, the family of Christ, still lived in the lands, lived in Jerusalem. And he says that, or it was another source, they say that afterwards they were cast out east, they dispersed east. So this leaves open a lot of doors, because this source does not say anything about, oh, the family of Christ was exterminated, or the family of Christ no longer is amongst us, but rather it simply leaves it open. the source says the Desposini, the family of Christ, was then scattered eastwards. East of Jerusalem could be the Iraq area or whatnot, even Syria, like let's say eastern parts of Syria and so forth. Let's say northeast Syria, east Syria, right? So it leaves the door open for anyone to get their hands on the source and then say, "Oh wow, it leaves it. Yeah. Let's just claim. We can claim it. It's open. The source says that they were there and now they're not there, and it's silent on what happened to them." So it leaves the door open for people to make lineage claims.
Yep. And that's actually pretty much probably making its way into the Quran for that reason, to try to shut that down. But what happened? They couldn't shut it down. They create a new guy, and then the other ones create another set of guys, everybody from the Ruh and the Nur and all of that, and they carry on. It's almost like this was trying to prevent what then actually happened. But like you said, let's actually cover that one in more detail when we're actually talking about the historical aspects. And let's see, what else have we got in store? I can't remember who's talking about this one.
I'll take it. So we went through covenant, Lord, and here another key word that is very well associated with al-Rahman is the word remembrance. Do this in remembrance of me. Anyone? Okay. Surah 21:36 we'll start. By the remembrance of al-Rahman. Then we see in 21:42, say, who shall, and then this is a blank word by Murad, presumably, by night and daytime from al-Rahman, rather they are averting about the remembrance of their Lord. Again, we have Lord al-Rahman in association, but here very crucially remembrance. Now in Surah 26:5, remembrance from al-Rahman, again an association. 36:11, whoever followed the remembrance and was timid of al-Rahman. The remembrance of al-Rahman, again in 43:36. So, like I was putting spilling the beans on the right off the gate, right? The remembrance, right? So there's two things in the New Testament that are related to remembering/remembrance. So we have the Holy Spirit who will be a reminder of all things, and then also we have the Eucharist, which we are told by Christ to do this in remembrance of him. So, is the remembrance of al-Rahman the Eucharist?
To me, certainly it looks that way. Every time that I have seen these verses and I have seen remembrance, I do not associate the word remembrance with Islam. From all of the hadiths and seerah and stuff that I have read, it's not there. You are not. I know that there are these verses. We are actually reading them about the remembrance, but it's not like they have an act. It's not like it's something active that they need to do, like in the actual command from the Bible to do this in remembrance of me. Like the remembrance thing just always makes me think, well, it's Christianity. Like Islam, they don't. They just have it in there in the book, but it doesn't seem to be as a core thing as you would have if you're thinking the five pillars of Islam or zakat or something like this. It's like, no, that's us. That's what we do. Or going on the pilgrimage to Mecca to lick a stone. That's what they do. But when you're thinking remembrance, is like, yeah, that's Christianity. So when we look at this word and it keeps appearing with very closely together with Ar-Rahman, which, as I have said already, I think 5 times by now, it appears a lot in Surah 19, which is Miriam, is like, yes, the authors, they had something very clear in their heads when they were writing this of who Al-Rahman was and what the remembrance of Al-Rahman actually was. It looks clear, I think.
Yeah, and they say remembrance, right? What remembrance is there in Islam? I would say none, because seemingly, from my perspective, there's a new Islam every 100 years. So they don't even remember what Islam was a century ago, before the 1924. Yeah, so here we're looking at Surah Maryam just as a visual indicator to show you how packed and how used al-Rahman is, and not in al-Hayyin declarations, as in the al-X, al-Y at the end of verses, but it's used very much as a standalone name, proper name, for a particular subject. We're not going to read through this. We've went through a couple of these verses already, just to show you as an indicator, visually, how packed and how used al-Rahman is in contrast to, let's say, every other surah. In here, we see in just the section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 is actually the max amount in any other surah. So in 19, we get it 16 times? 16 times.
Yes.
So yeah, it's very clear that Surah Maryam is heavily associated and packed with al-Rahman.
Yep. And no Ar-Rahim, no nothing else. It's only Allah, Lord and Creator, and now Ar-Rahman that appears in this way, that it is used as though you would know exactly what it's talking about. If you listen or you read the word Lord, you know what it is, and so on. But here is just a name, more than a title, is something that they would immediately recognize. And we've seen in the inscriptions from the South Arabian region that it was an actual name pretty much used here and there. And the way that they actually sounded, it was more about a name. People would recognize the character by that. It was not an adjective. If you are saying, I don't know, the one who hears all is like, well, that's a very descriptive thing, and you would know that this is talking about God. But it seems to be used as a name, and I think this also shows that very clearly. It keeps going again and again, using, if you replace that with a name, just replace it with a name, just for fun, maybe, I don't know, Jesus, and see what you get and see what you think. But it seems to be quite revealing, particularly being in Surah 19. Miriam is seventh time or 10th time. I don't know. I've said it a few times. Anyway, and I
Yeah,
think this is
so
the last one,
yeah,
and the
we're
last
gonna
slide. Yes,
go
with
through a couple of these verses, right? So you'll start, I suppose.
yeah, let's actually we try to go like one by one, but they are just some honorable mentions. We have actually extracted all of them, as I mentioned before, but there are lots of them that they just don't tell you anything. It's just saying, well, Al-Rahman, whatever, and you look at it, you don't know if it's talking about. It doesn't have any keywords basically. So this one, the first one, Surah 19, verse 58, goes blah blah blah. We had guided and collected when the signs of Ar-Rahman are being iterated. Now, signs or ayat, that is translated as signs, but it can also mean other things, including verses, miracles. It is something that people have seen. Now, going with this thing that we're putting forward, that Ar-Rahman was just yet another name for Jesus that people will associate in that manner. This would be, when the miracles of Jesus are being iterated to people, they're just telling, and people would understand what it was being spoken of. So something basic like this. Next one for you.
We see in 19 again. It's all 19, isn't it?
Yeah.
1961, the gardens of Aden, which is Eden. They just have a difficulty pronouncing things. Which Al-Rahman has promised his servants. This one is amazing to me because in the Old Testament, let's say the more so Allahian conception of a, you could argue, even though the Old Testament is Trinitarian too, frankly, but you could sort of argue, okay, this is Allah, and this is the one monad God, and he promised his servants Eden. Okay, makes sense. The only problem here, it's a big problem, is that the Old Testament never promises anyone the garden. In fact, and let me just sort of see here a little bit in specifics. The Old Testament, the garden is seen as something that is lost due to sin. So in Genesis 3:24, we see he drove out the man, Adam, right? So it was cast out from the garden, and the promises made in the Old Testament are about the restoration of the actual the wilderness. For example, in Isaiah 51:3, we see he will make her wilderness like Eden. So Eden is used in sort of like a reminiscence, like, okay, we're kicked out of Eden, but the wilderness is gonna be made like Eden. Like the world will be like the kingdom is. It's that kind of language. The promise itself in the Old Testament is not of the garden. The promise given in Genesis 15:18 is, to your offspring I will give this land, the land of Canaan. That's the promise. So the servants are not given the promise of Eden by what one could say as being the Father or the Allah of the Old Testament. Instead, the promise about the garden is made in the New Testament. So, one great example, everyone knows this, is in Luke 23:43. We read, "Today you will be with me in paradise." The word here in the Greek is paradisio, right? It's a word for garden. It's the Greek word for garden. So the promise about the garden for his servants is not made by, and I don't like this phrase, but the God of the Old Testament. It's the same God, right? But the promise itself, in terms of like where we can find that promise made in textual material, is only made in the New Testament. By who? By Christ Jesus of Nazareth. So therefore, who is al-Rahman?
Look, it's in Surah 19. That is a shock. Uh, but if we think about, okay, so Ar-Rahman, let's think it can be Yahweh, can be Jesus, can be Allah. And then you read that whole sentence. The only one that actually fits is Jesus. With the Old Testament, is like, it doesn't quite fit like this. And when you think about Allah, it's like well, they think that he promises a garden because it says here, but when you then read the hadiths and what they think they are getting, it's not a garden, it's a brothel. So there is that big problem. When you read this, there's only one that actually matches this description, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to restate it. The gardens of Aden, which Al Rahman has promised his servants. So Al Rahman promises the gardens. Old Testament, no promise of gardens. New Testament, explicit promise again and again of gardens. What is being referenced? Clearly, New Testament. In the New Testament, who makes the promise to his servants about the garden? Jesus. Who is Al Rahman? Jesus. Simple.
It's very simple. And the next one is something we had discussed before as well. So Surah 19, verse 96, still on Surah 19, as with everything. Surely those who believed and worked corrections, Al-Rahman will soon render them fondness. And it's like, okay. So we've seen this in Surah 47, verse 2, the one where it's saying, those who believed and worked corrections and believed by that which was made to descend upon Mahmat, and then it, which can be translated as he, is the same word, he is the truth from their Lord. He amended their conditions and he removed their sins and amended their conditions, something like that. So it's talking about that past event. We've seen this. In here we have part of that sentence again. Surely those who believed and worked corrections. So it's talking about those who did that in the past. And then instead of saying that he removed their sins and amended their conditions, he's saying that Ar-Rahman is going to do something for them. He will soon render for them fondness. Is okay. So we have on the one hand Mahmad, who did these things for people in the past, and now the same act. So those who believed, we have Ar-Rahman popping in, and then in the future, soon, he will do something that sounds very much something very heavenly. So once again, it seems to be all going in circles, and it was just another title for Jesus, just like Muhammad is to this day, actually.
Yeah, and we see in Surah 25. Oh, we're finally outside of Surah Maryam. 25:26, we read, "The true kingdom today is for Al-Rahman." Here's a question. If we're talking about Allah here, why would there be a particular day when the true kingdom is for him? What do you think, JC?
I think exactly the same as you think, that that qualifier shouldn't be there. If we're talking Islam in the way that we know it, it should be everything is Allah. It's always been Allah. That's it. The true kingdom has always been and will always be for Allah. But in here, there's a qualifier, meaning something must have happened. And
Right.
if today the true kingdom is for Ar-Rahman, that means that yesterday it wasn't, but today it is. And of course, you can actually imply that if it is today, it will be from today until forever. But there must be an event that happens that makes Ar-Rahman becoming the owner, perhaps, of the true kingdom, something like that.
Right, the Malik or the Malik. The true kingdom today. So, what happened today such that the true kingdom is for him? And who is he? I would posit very simply it's the purchase of the kingdom, it's the purchase through his blood. The salvation plan today in question today is the day of the crucifixion. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, or possibly even if this is being spoken out loud or written down by somebody, even in the fifth, sixth, seventh century before it makes it into the Quran, someone is saying that the kingdom is now, is today for Jesus. What it would mean is, well, it's been for a while, but today is for him. He's making a distinction between how it was before and how it is now. Not necessarily it has to be on this very day. It can actually be a bit more of not an exaggeration, but making a distinction between what happened before the crucifixion and now, because you are on the other side of the crucifixion and the resurrection, you are saying today is for al-rahman, uh, meaning they would understand it that you're making a distinction from what was before it. So I think both ways would make sense.
Right. Today as opposed to yesterday in a very abstract sense. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Then the next one is actually we have discussed that one before, and actually Andrew has mentioned this one as well, which is the trellis thing again. So Ar-Rahman even himself over the trellis, which is what Kash you've described before and as well in a previous video, and I'm sure we will discuss again. We've added their throne because that's how they normally translate it. And when I'm actually looking at these sentences, because they appear in quite a few places, I do think that it is, or it may have been like firmament or the actual throne, but it doesn't really matter. Even if you go completely with the translation as it is, it would still make sense because there is this whole imagery of Jesus sitting on the right hand side of the Father and the throne being his and the earth being his. So it would still make sense. I mean, when we dig deep and we look at the word and it's a very Christian imagery, that's even better. But even if it was throne, it would still actually work. Also, when we see that the creator, as believed by the people who wrote the Quran, was Jesus, when it says that he did things and then he was in the heavens, it still makes sense. It's still talking about him doing things and then having being in the heavens. So it all actually fits. And this is certainly what the writers of the Quran were telling people. They were saying the things that Jesus was, except that, of course, they got it very, very wrong in many cases. But the Al Rahman doing these things make more sense about Jesus than otherwise.
Okay, then we have 2563 as our final honorable mention. We read the servants of Al Rahman who walk over earth in debility. And when the ignorant ones addressed them, they said, Peace, Shalom. We see here, well, I'll finish reading it. The end of the verse is in the. Oh no, this is not necessarily the case. So we're gonna just speak on the verse here. So here we see that we have the subject of question here are the servants of Al Rahman, and what are they doing? They are walking over earth in debility. Okay, and what are they confronted with? They are confronted when the ignorant ones address them saying shalom, peace. Who says shalom? That would be the Jewish people. So the Jewish people here are being considered the ignorant ones, at least a certain subsection of the Jewish people. And who are the servants of Al-Rahman who walk over earth in debility? Walk over earth. That's pretty grand scale. Who could have possibly in history, as a group of people who were servants of a particular Al-Rahman, what group of people went around, let's say, to India, to here, to there, to everywhere, spreading the gospel? I spilled the beans. It's the disciples, it's the apostles. They're the ones who were sent out by Christ, the Lord, to spread the gospel all over the earth, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and there are when here it says the ignorant ones, is worth mentioning that what these people probably meant is they were approaching the Jewish people, and their job of these preachers was to make them believe in the Messiah. That's why the Quran is full of Messiah, Messiah, Isa, and so on. And Ar-Rahman, we can add that one to the list as well. So this is what they are doing. For them, the Jewish people, they needed to accept Jesus, Isa, the Messiah, all of this. If they didn't, then they were the ignorant ones because they had stopped before. So it wouldn't be just, say, a blanket insult like they just hate them. Is quite the opposite. They just thought they needed to do the final step and become their version of Christianity, which of course was a heresy, but never mind. So, but it does sound like Akash has said, servants of Ar-Rahman, and then they encounter people who say Shalom, is, I think we all know who these verses were actually talking about. It certainly looks very much as it's talking about the apostles.
I would agree, very much so.
Great.
I in the background, sorry, I've been trying to search because I just couldn't get it out of my mind that in the Arabian inscriptions we had a variation between one end and two ends. So I'm trying to research whether or not, huh? Yeah, I think this is valid. It seems to be the case that I was looking at how earlier it just came to mind because in I think it was the Aramaic that the n suffix, as in having an extra n, acts as the diminutive. The diminutive, like little, like ito in Spanish. You know, cantarito, a little singer or whatever. That's the name of a colleague of mine. So to have Rahman and have Rahmanan, potentially we have Rahman and we have little Rahman. I'm just putting that out there for maybe someone in the audience to pick up on that and chase it down.
We have here a comment from Andrew. So these servants are the litter bearers who beat the trellis litter throne. They're walking carefully over the earth, so they do not disturb the rider, the person on the litter. Yes, absolutely. Or is the apostles? It's one of the two, I think.
Oh, you're speaking like a Sufi, Andrew. I don't quite understand you.
Oh, well, we will have some things to say about some of the Sufi traditions, I think, at one point. But for now, we are just continuing with this. And actually, we haven't actually got any more of these other bits and pieces for this one. I think we have explained clearly what we think Ar-Rahman is. So then that one is done. It appears very heavily on the surah that is about Mary. And we have seen how it is used different to everything else. In the south of Arabia, they would have used that name in many different ways, including the Father, including Yahweh. But it does look quite a bit when we consider all of the other verses in the Quran that this was just another name for Jesus. And all of this work has been almost an introduction to the very next topic. Should I reveal what we're going to talk about next time, Kash?
I am very excited. Please do.
Well, yes, Allah is Jesus. So that will be the next talk. This one has been almost like an introduction because we have zeroed in on one title and saying how that affects the whole Quran and what the people who wrote this to begin with, actually how they were leaning. And the next one, we're going to just expand that horizon because if Ar-Rahman is Jesus, that means that now we can go through the Quran and see Jesus in more places. And yes, oh boy, we have seen Jesus everywhere. So I really hope that you guys will actually join us next time when we are actually talking about that. And you will agree with us that the people who actually wrote this were actually more Christian than we give them credit for. Heretical Christians, but Christians nonetheless. Are you looking forward to that one, Kash?
Yeah, I've noticed that the more time I look into the Quranic text and I engage with the Murad translation and so forth, I feel like I'm in a maze where every time I turn a corner, whether left or right, all I am there is seeing Jesus. It's just, he's everywhere. I can't escape him in the text.
It happens more and more. And I think, well, I don't want to spoil some of the things that are going to happen as well in other shows. But yes, the moment that you see one of these verses, which is very clearly talking about Jesus, then you start to see that there is actually more and more. And because you start to understand
Language.
the different techniques they used in order to disguise it, you also understand how they went from a book that was, well, so far we can say mostly about Jesus in a heretical manner, but Jesus nonetheless, into this other version where you have all of these stories about the Hijaz and Muhammad. And it's like those things are not there. It is still about Jesus, It's just they have just changed the narrative completely, and we're reading the standard Islamic narrative. But I think we're making a very good progress, and hopefully we'll get people from the community to help us, particularly with the Aramaic, when we're actually trying to unpick some very difficult words. And we will get the community to start paying more attention to what the Quran says as opposed to what the tradition says, so that we can all get to the bottom of what the book originally said, so that we can all sleep better at night, knowing what happened 1400 years ago.
Yep, and knowing that you will wake up in the morning with your head still on your shoulders. There's a thing I think to emphasize here and to encourage everyone who's watching this. It's actually super fun, guys. The biggest puzzle that ever was. This is a textual tradition which actually says something entirely different from what the modern reading of it is. Isn't that exciting? It actually comes from a different language textual tradition, from the Aramaic, Syro-Aramaic. And it's not actually a revelation from Gabriel. It's not, none of that's true. And it's a massive text, and there's a lot of digging to be done. And the more you dig, the more you start to learn how it speaks, the language of the text. Then you start to see how cover means both cover, as in kafir, means both cover and atone. And the language is used dually. And then you start to be able to, oh, one more domino in the puzzle or one more piece of the puzzle. And then everything opens itself up to you. And now you start to be able to read the text as it was intended, at least closer to that. So I would say, please, I beg, engage with the material. Like, we have done a little bit of okay, the first 5 were like, some of them were okay, some foundational things, what to know about Rasam and so forth, right? This takes a little bit of time, but it actually, given the tools we have access to, and if you're able to use them, this is an undertaking that anyone actually can do, or at least participate in and contribute to. So I think this is an exciting time. We live in an age where we're actually the ones who are there to unpick this big mystery after 1400 years. Isn't that exciting?
It is the greatest literary mystery in human history. We have things from the Egyptians and stuff that we cannot read and things like that. But this is very high impact. 1.6 billion people, they live their lives based on a book that said or used to say something very, very different. Well, used to say, it still says something very different, and we need all hands on deck, so to speak, to actually look at exactly what it said, to so that they can see how they have been deceived, how they are being deceived to this day, not necessarily for say an apologetics sort of way, like, oh yes, so you then join to my religion. It's like, no, it's because your religion has now been proven to be completely false, and it's very damaging. Otherwise, just look at all of the things happening around the world. So that's actually what it is. Now, you need your freedom to go out there and search for the truth, because we have now demonstrated you are not being told the truth. So that has never happened in human history. Plus 1.6 billion people, regimes all over the world, Europe not doing too hot at the moment. If we have all hands on deck, people will be inspired to find the solutions, and as a collective, I'm sure that we will get that sooner rather than later, and help um, our Muslim brothers and sisters before they get into more trouble than they already are.
Because, like you're saying with Europe, secular Europe does not have any cards to play. They have no argument that they can present to the Muslim new arrivals to convince them to, give their life to Christ, or just to see a different way. It's just not in the cards of the secularists. It's actually on us as Christians. We have to do the work. We have to show, and we're not here to, we're not here to, like, oh, here's a hadith where Muhammad is questionable. Oh, let's have a more. No, throw all of that out. We're dealing with a cult which is basing their belief system on a book that they can't even read. They don't know what the book says. So let's tell them what the book says. That is the goal here.
Yeah, and there are people, they are not doing that. Now here, Andrew has, I couldn't have put it better myself. So this is exactly what needs to be done. And as well. This is actually what is happening, and anything that we know about Islam is not is what is reported, and that is only the peak of the iceberg. Every time that something appears, that's not the truth. That's only the thing that actually gets out. So if we all get together in this mission, we will get there. And I think it's now going to snowball. I think we're almost getting there. So hopefully, people watching, you will get engaging in this material. You will actually share the material, well, like, subscribe, this basic YouTube stuff, but also ask questions. If you find answers or if you find verses that you think, okay, that one is problematic, then let us know. We can investigate that. Let's actually try to get as many people as possible involved in looking at the Quran and what it actually said. And hopefully, like this, we will all together get there sooner rather than later.
And we can present them not like the secularists. Our end solution is to present them a different way. Come back home. Come to Christ.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, Cash. So thank you very much for today, as always, and thank you everybody watching. Cash, last words for you.
Come to Christ.
Okay, so great. Thank you very much, Cash. I'll actually say the last words, just like the Christian Prince says a lot. We are the Crusades. See you soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.